I was trying to figure that out at the 5 o'clock meeting.
You're all set.
Thank you so much, John. All right, so I would like to first of all apologize for our tardy start. We had our budget finance meeting ran over, but I would like to go ahead and call this meeting of the Strategic Planning Committee to order. And welcome. Oh, and my device just closed. So we look at the agenda. One of the things that we wanted to do tonight was sort of set our direction for how we want to, for the type of things that we want to entertain on the Strategic Planning Committee. Sort of figuring out, let's determine which things are properly discussed here and brought before the board, which things are more properly board discussions. And we wanted to put down how we wanted to get to those decisions and work through that. So one of the things that we created, so we do have a draft document, and this sort of sets out, it's a starting point. So it created it as a starting point for our discussion to guide this discussion. And one of the challenges, again, as I'm learning with, especially with the virtual meetings, is circulating this document. So like emailing it to the entire committee, that actually qualifies as a meeting if we have the shared document. So I'm trying to figure out how to manage through that. So that's the challenge. So what we have here, so we're going to share the meeting, share the our draft memo, and it is a living document, and I think John's going to do that right now. And so as a group tonight, what ideally we would like to get to is this is the procedures that we are going to follow going forward. And I think it will help frame our discussions to have something that we get, some procedures that we can use to guide our discussions. And so that's the ultimate purpose of this. So let's talk through it real quickly. We're not going to necessarily need to read them verbatim, but all the goals of our committee, strategic planning, should drive that are driving the district forward should start with our Board of Education goals. So, that's right there at the top of the document. Supporting the district priorities, promoting good stewardship, developing policies and support of these outcomes, improving communication, and then improving accountability. And these are all things that in our, we'll call it the retreat that we went to last year, when we were actually all in person. These are the things that that were important to us as a Board of Education. So following, just right below that, if we could scroll up a little bit, John, thank you, is the purpose of strategic planning. And, we can read through that. And again, this is just a straight definition, and this is something that we can work with. And then right below the strategic planning is our role, is the role of the committee. And so we come into our.
Well, John, I think John may have scrolled. Yep.
So just a little, yeah. A little, so this is just some notes that we currently put down. This is our role, the role of our committee, and we would definitely want input of the entire committee on this. Again, like I said, this is just a draft, and this is a sort of a launching off point for us to get to where we need to be. And we can scroll up, and then finally, this document is a draft of strategic plan. Now, this is something that that we have discussed at our prior meetings. Is the enrollment experience and how the feeder schools and sort of how we can move forward from here. Like what are things that we need to take care of, and so to determine the outcome and how we want to proceed, we need to set up guiding questions. And so that's going to be true of anything that comes before the committee, we need to have the guiding questions that are going to get us to the point that we need to be. You know, if we these are the questions that we need to answer. The answers to these questions are going to guide how we move forward. And again, these questions we put in as this is our starting point. We have our action steps. Again, timeline and outcomes. You know, right at this point, these are placeholders. This is to give us a guide of how a way that we could do it. And and then again, the other, so we had the feeder patterns, and then we also had the transportation. So really the same setup. The last section here, right there, thank you, John, the strategy, excuse me, the pay to play. That's something that we have discussed, but something like the pay to participate, that's something that is more of an operational piece, perhaps, than it is a strategic planning piece. And so that's something that maybe that's a better discussion for the board as a whole than something for this committee to jump in and tackle. You know, it's not, there aren't as many moving pieces to it. It's not, there aren't external stakeholders that have to weigh in. It's a decision that can be made with the entire board, obviously, with, you know, input from, you know, everyone that needs to be making that decision, but it does fall more into the operational aspect than it does to strategic planning. Any thoughts or questions so far? Just on the document? Thank you, John. Yeah, we're done with that for now.
I'm sorry, I guess I'm a little confused, Ken.
Mm-hmm.
Is the point of the committee to discuss the document, or was there some other expected outcome? You went through all that very fast. I get it.
I did.
Send it to us, but I'm not sure what was the intent, just to show it to us. What was the intent of?
Can I jump in for just one second? I actually think we can share the document. What is, if you remember at our last meeting, we brought up the idea of maybe tackling some of these issues collaboratively offline. And that's where it actually fell in, and Ken brought up a really good point. That's where it became problematic. Is that considered a meeting? Because we're all contributing to one common document. So that was the greater issue. And actually, maybe John Mansfield, if you don't mind putting that document back up. So when we started to structure today's meeting, we started taking all of the ideas that you all gave us. Let me just try to change my screen here, that we all talked about as strategic planning, and attempted to organize them in categories. So you might look at, for example, this first one, you might remember there was a conversation that it was just like everything, right? There was a lot of kitchen sink thrown out there, a lot of good ideas. And so we tried to structure it so that we had one strategy that we were working towards, and then all of what everyone contributed to the guiding questions. And then, like you all recommended, like, can we identify some action steps, some timelines, and an outcome? Some of them might be short-term, some of them might be long-term. The committee may say, we're not prepared to take this on short-term or long-term, and maybe you can look at those guiding questions and opine on them. And then the second one, which was around the transportation study, because that's lingering a little bit, as you all remember from this past spring. And you might remember when the consulting firm came out to speak to the board, there were some gaps in their study, and we all wanted to say, okay, well, we want that information. What do we need to do this right? So that's in there, along with other conversation points. And then the last item was the pay to participate. And as Ken mentioned, that feels like it needs to just go to a Board of Education meeting, because there's not a lot of strategizing around it. It either isn't a presentation, or a few, maybe some comparables in other communities, and then the Board of Education can decide what next steps there are. So perhaps one suggestion, Ken, if it's okay,
Sure,
might be to look at John Mansfield, if you don't mind scrolling up. And I was actually going to attempt to type into the document as we were working, but I think John said that if I do, it throws this off. Is that correct, John Mansfield?
No, your name just pops up in a cursor on the thing. That was it. No big deal.
That's all. So if you all wanted to take a look at the strategy here, like if you just took a look at it now and look at those guiding questions, does it encompass what the commentary at the last two strategic meetings were? And if so, great. If not, what are we missing? And then perhaps looking at when we might want to, and perhaps there's a subcommittee off of this, because some of these are big topics. There's start time is there, getting kids back on the same schedule or the same tiers, consolidating in elementary school, et cetera. Some felt more urgent. Some felt like, yes, they're important, but perhaps we don't need to do this at this moment. But that might be one suggestion. If anyone has others, glad to hear them. And then the second one is around transportation. And at least for the administration, we did feel a sense of urgency with that first guiding question, because if that's something that this committee and or the Board of Education at large would like us to consider for next year, that's something we're going to have to tackle, as you know, sooner than later. Liz, does that help clarify a little bit more?
Yeah, it does. Thank you for trying to pull it together. I appreciate that.
Yeah, so Liz, also, like Dr. De Silva said, we tried to do this as a collaborative document, and that's something that does not pass. Some things that landed on here really should just be a board decision, even if they take a few years to implement.
Right.
Not a strategic planning issue, it's just a decision and then a 2 or 3 year implementation program behind it. And then other things that are landing on this committee might be not necessarily a subcommittee, but a larger group of stakeholders within the community that this committee takes charge on, but doesn't do all the work in a vacuum. So that's why we kind of took a step backwards on some of this.
Yeah, and Liz, the way that I look at it is we're still going to, what this does is it gives us that framework in which to have the discussion, and it gives it that form. So the discussions and the decision making and the reporting and the receiving of the reporting and deciding on next steps, that's all going to happen. This is a way to codify it so that we have it gives some structure to our discussions. That's really how I see this document.
See, Kathleen.
I so appreciate this, because I think in some ways this committee has been used as a dump all for anything that people don't know what to put in. And I really appreciate the guiding questions and the focus and what is our work and what is not our work, because if as it existed before, it almost became untenable. So hopefully we can make this tenable and guide ourselves so that we can look at what the board can do, what is not in our purveyance, and move forward. And I appreciate this. Thank you very much.
I just want to echo that. I appreciate it as well. I mean, obviously at the really big level, not even getting into some of these guiding questions, which I do appreciate, is obviously anything that's decision making is at the board level. So I think we can all agree easily, right, that no decisions are made at a committee level, but that all decisions are at the board level.
Sure. And yes, so no, so I misspoke a little on that. What I meant by decisions is when something comes up before the board, have we done the proper analysis? Is there anything else that we need to be able to present to the board, sort of our thoughts on any particular issue? But well made.
One of the things that I noticed from the questions that the committee brought up the last time we were together, I don't know, if it may have been 2 times ago, is that the answers to some questions may actually help the action steps for the others. So for example, there's one action step already in there that is looking to answer that first guiding question, which is, when does the enrollment impact the student learning experience at SERMS? That may not even be exactly the way someone asked it, but generally speaking, I think we need to know that in order to look at whether or not we need to change the feeder patterns, or, look at a grade level experience that's starting to decline, or whatever the case may be. And so Principal Salem doesn't know this yet, but he's actually already had this discussion with me along with Ms. Freese, in that because they've experienced this before when there was an increase in enrollment at SERMs. And so I think it would be interesting for this committee to hear a little bit about looking at the enrollment study that we received in November, looking at whether it's the middle or high range, and when does that experience shift, because I think that could support the next level of planning. And again, we don't necessarily need to plot that in now, but whether or not we do need to consider the feeder schools and what might be the timeline for that. Do we need to consider reshifting enrollment, let's just say, on a couple of streets, or do we need to do more than that? And so that might just be a starting point. But again, that's up for the committee to decide, and then certainly report back to the board as a whole. And there may be guiding questions here that are missing that we just didn't capture from our last meeting. And some you may want to remove. It's just not something that you want to tackle, at least not thinking about 3 to 5 years, or the short term 1 to 2. At least walking away from tonight, though, when we looked at the second strategy that was discussed, and there was a lot thrown into transportation. There was, okay, let's look at start times. Let's look at getting all of our children back in the elementary level on the same tier. Are there opportunities for electric buses? So all of that, I don't necessarily believe we'll have a direct, but maybe in that first guiding question. But I do think if we could walk away tonight with the committee saying, yes, this is something that we'd like, and maybe we need to discuss at the full board level, but yes, we'd like to consider the opt-in, opt-out, because that was a big discussion point from this past spring. And I just don't want to forget that that was something that the Board of Education discussed as a possible option, and identify the strengths and the challenges. Our budget's already set, right? So we can do that, identify the strengths and the challenges that come with that model, if you all think that that's a good idea, because we do need to get our head around communicating that, finding a way to make sure that families have the opportunity to opt in, that our language is really clear. And then certainly that would feed into the next level of work around optimization, if we were to gain any information from that.
Yeah, I mean, you guys know I personally support that. I think that would be a good idea to really evaluate that. I think now that we've gone through a year of constant replanning and virtualization and non-virtualization, and parents getting information about what they can opt in and out of, there are a lot of flexibility points that may not have been there prior to 2020. So, I think that really studying that and making sure that we can do it legally and compliantly, and that there would be an opportunity to optimize that data when people do opt out, because there's an operational process that comes behind that decision as well that we need to consider. And I'm not sure that we're there yet as a district in terms of the way we manage our transportation today. So I think that to me is a short-term strategic opportunity to save some money, possibly. We need the business case to do that, but I do think that this is one that I personally would say I would love to bring this up at the broader board and have a conversation and really get a team that knows data, that knows transportation on it.
Yeah, and that's a good
Liz,
point.
I agree totally. Having been a parent, the child lived less than a mile from the school, that we would have opted out. And I'm sure there are many other families. We would have done it for another reason. And I think that it could really help to streamline the process. But yeah, so I think that's something to look at if it's just the buses. And the only thing I worry about is what everyone says, in case of an emergency. Even for our family, in case of an emergency meant the child could walk, but many does not.
Right.
I'd also like to say I would support bringing that to the full board
You were good, Margaret. We could hear you.
Go, Margaret.
Oh, sorry. I saw Kathleen. I wasn't sure she was still talking. I'm sorry. No, I was just going to say I support also having that conversation at the full board. And as Liz said, we just want to make sure we can do it legally, compliantly. I might also just add in there, let's just make sure that we look at our policies, because if we have to change some of our policies around bus stops and stuff, let's do that if it allows us to achieve this. That shouldn't be the barrier, or it should be a discussion point.
Absolutely, and that's another point with the guiding questions is we want to use those to help us identify external parties that need to have that from whom we need to get input. That's just an excellent example there. We need information from the transportation company. If we're staying with the transportation, if we're talking electric buses, maybe there's some synergy that we can work with the energy task force. Perhaps there's some synergy there. If we're moving back up to the feeder patterns at the middle schools, if we're talking about buildings and space in town, I think that's very obviously going to involve people on the town side that are going to have to be involved in discussions around that. We really can't think about what we're going to do without having to know all of our options. And so that's the other point of the guiding questions, is to help us identify those parties too.
The other, I'm just going to jump in because it's
Sure.
been since I've been on the board, and I think the strategic committee, and Margaret, you can jump in because you were more involved than I, is particularly in terms of start times, particularly for the elementary schools being on the same times and the start times. Is this the place for it, or does that need a subcommittee as need be? Because it involves buses, it involves schedules, it involves the community, it involves health and wellness. So would it be bigger than us? And I just want to put that out there.
No, absolutely, you're correct.
Yeah, I think that's so that you bring up a good point, Kathleen. And I think that's when you're starting to look at the short-term and long-term goals and managing what the administration, right, can navigate and the timing in which they can navigate, but also just the manpower and the voice that you want to be engaged in the work. Because smart start times have lots of different layers. One is just getting all elementary kids on the same start time, which is one question. And so there's probably a cost associated with that. And then if we're looking at shifts in start times, let's say at the secondary level, what is the impact, not only cost-wise, but the impact, let's just say community-wise or kid-wise? What does that mean for kids, for athletics or extracurriculars? What does that mean for homework and when they're going to be doing homework? So there's a lot of different study that would need to happen with that, some of which has been done, I believe, a number of years ago. So that might be something that's not, right, it's not going to happen tomorrow. But certainly you want, again, voice on that type of, doing that type of work, in addition to the administration being engaged in it.
But that's actually a good example. So something like that, if we knew that was, and I'm literally throwing it out there, so members of the public, this is not saying anything, but if we were to say in 3 years, our goal is to have start times change in 3 years. If that's the goal, we can back out and know that the steps to do that are, well, then next year we've got to get elementary on the same tier and bite that little piece. And then the next year we need to do this. And then, so it does feel like that identification of a longer term and then backing out some of these mini steps that might even be identified, like you said, in this document. Makes sense.
Yep. And the only way to get elementary all on the same start time would include a capital expenditure as far as the Barlow, Scotland campus is concerned, to be able to get cars and buses into both of those at the same time. So yes, there's a lot involved in even that simple first step of elementary all at the same start time.
Good point.
And I'm just going to add in, it seems as if some of our cohorts that we play sports with are moving in a certain direction. So we need to look at those, because that although that's another tier, as they begin to move in another direction, it adds one less, impediment in terms of that. Although we have the bus and all of the other issues that we.
Yeah, I would just say, let's also not forget that we had subcommittees on this 2 years ago, if that, and they did a ton of work and it was an unaffordable result. So I would hope that we can not start over on all of this and really hear from the majority of the community who was not as vocal as the minority that was very much pushing this under a global lobbyist group or a national lobbyist group around pushing some of these. And in some of those local communities that are doing it, there is also a ton of pushback. And so this is definitely not a short-term thing, but I also want to make sure that everyone remembers that we've gone down this road again. Just a few years ago, we're going to go down the same road again. What are we going to do differently? What are we going to make sure that we learn from that prior experience, and how much time and energy are we going to expect from our community members to either support or deny this, given everything else we have going on? So just something to consider as we go through this. I would hate to have to, go through the same things we went through 2 years ago as a community member, as a parent, as a taxpayer. We heard a lot of that. And I'd say that the headlines say that the other communities that are doing this are following that same playbook and having those same results, which weren't necessarily the most positive with the community. So,
Liz, the part where you described the community resources and the board's resources, that's a real thing when you look at strategic planning, because your time and energy goes on what you value or what, and it could be for any one of these things, right? It could be for any one of these things. And so we do have to consider, when you're looking at a set of things that you want to study or you want to be better at, where do you want to place the emphasis on time? Because there's only so much, and there's only also so many resources. That's human resources outside of even being financial resources. So, perhaps one piece that we can, which we can do, is we can share this document. You can think about what's missing from this document, and we can add to it as we go along, and then start creating some action steps that are manageable alongside the other work that we want to get done outside of this committee, right? So would it be helpful, just to start off, just because so we can kind of get the lay of the land, to have the CERMS leadership come to our next meeting and just talk a little bit about conceptually, what does the experience look like, and what is the actual, and where does it start impacting the experience in terms of enrollment? Is it never mind, contractual kinds of things with teachers, but is it 24 kids? Is it 25 kids? Is it 27 kids? And then looking at our enrollment report and starting to maybe assess and then say, okay, from here, it looks like this is what we need to do next. Would that be a good idea as a starting point, and just getting our feet wet with this?
Yes.
Yeah, I think absolutely.
So that's one thing I heard. And then the second thing I heard from at least some of the committee members is the idea, at least, of the opting out and opting in as a discussion at the Board of Education table, because we would need to start work. So obviously May 24th is probably a little bit too soon, because we would need to do a little bit of work on this in preparation for the discussion, at least, perhaps at our June meeting. Is that something that I also heard?
Yep. And I think it would be great to consider, Kathleen, you're on that committee for climate or whatever. It would be really interesting to see what kind of studies we could bring into that discussion, or person we could bring into that discussion about, the impact of empty buses floating around. Something to think about.
Yep.
No, I agree. But I think the first thing we need to look at before we hear that is just get our legal consult. Can we do this legally?
I did do some of that work, Kathleen, and I'll go back and pull the state law and the policy. So theoretically, we can do this work. We can do it, but there's some guidance that we have in terms of the our requirement by law. So what that means is, and why I say using this coming year as an opportunity to identify the strengths and the challenges, not only for the family, but for the school side, is what happens when you don't, route everybody in. What does it feel like, right? For the kid, is the kid now waiting? Is it backing up for another parent? Understanding that a little bit. So I think the best thing that we can do at this point is get as much information as possible for the Board of Education in June. The board can discuss it and then give us some direction of whether or not they would like to consider this as a possibility. Because if we do want to consider it as a possibility, I imagine that we have to move very, very quickly to be prepared for August. And that's not, obviously it's not a lot of time. So I think that this is one of the sooner than later pieces, if this is something that we're serious about. I did do a little bit of research in local communities. And I only learned of one school district that does the opt-in, opt-out option. And there was some history of when and why they did that. But for the most part, other school districts did not do it because of the challenges that they faced when parents elected to change their mind for various reasons. That said, I think coming off of a COVID year, I think it's worth a discussion at the board level of whether or not we want to give it a go.
No, good. And Liz, in terms of the environmental committee, I'm sure they'd be behind it, but right now they're just looking at the long-term impact of fossil fuels. But, I will bring it up at the next meeting, nevertheless, because it is important, but they're looking at the town structure as a whole. But thank you.
There's another piece, by the way, that we may be able to do. I would just need to learn more, is we may be able to actually identify who's opting in and who's opting out and never actually implement it. So they could probably do, again, it's part of a discussion point. They could probably do an optimization study based off of the opt-in, opt-out, but we wouldn't necessarily do the back end work, meaning the bus routes would be prepared for all coming in and all coming out. So that's another option that we could be prepared to discuss in June.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, because then you can at least get a sense for the data and what you could do, even if it takes 2 years to implement, because you have to work out the kinks on the optimization side. Because even to your point, just the data, if we're not using the tools to their fullest extent now, we're not going to use them by August to plan new enrollees. And the last thing we want to do is leave a kindergarten around a corner. So
yeah. You're right, Liz. And ultimately, there's nothing that upsets parents more than the start of the school year and their bus not being there on time or at the right place. So it may just be, let's get the data and let's see what that tells us and study that over the year and report back. So that just might be an option.
The other, who no longer have children, is, have we looked at the data of how many people have moved into this town, knowing all over the place that people are buying homes? What kind of resurgence of student enrollment we might have, or is that still too early to look at?
I would say exactly what I said to a school this past week. May is tricky, especially with the kinder age. So, families are continuously enrolling. I think late July would probably be the safest bet.
Okay. So with the brief glance that you've had at these guiding questions, like we'll stick to the enrollment projections. Is there anything in there that the committee feels is missing? I guess that's probably the most important, or something that
Ken, I don't know if it was just my sound, but I lost you for a little bit. Okay.
Heard the first part.
I will try again. Is there anything in the brief time that we've got to spend with this document? Is there any, are there any guiding questions that anyone on the committee feels are missing? Is there anything, sort of at this first pass?
I'm not in a position to answer that, having seen the document for 4 seconds. So I'll just put it out there that.
Nope.
I don't know, maybe.
Sure. No. No, there's not in just this, and like you said, the 4 seconds that we've had to, that you spent with it.
Ken, I don't know that I have, I too would like to think about it a little bit, but what I might want to say is one of the guiding questions that's on here that I do think I have heard the board say quite a bit. And perhaps it's the planning now and thinking about for the future, but it's that getting the elementary schools on the same tier. Again, regardless of whether that leads us to something else, that's been something that we've talked about for a long, long time. And I really think we should try to get at least some attention on, at least understanding what that might look like. I don't know if board members or committee members agree.
Margaret, I agree.
Yep. Agreed.
And particularly as we get more of the enrollment numbers, we can look at that. And and I know that's involved with the bus, but it's so essential. People, it's what I hear most frequently.
Yeah, agreed.
Yep. That sounds good.
And to add on that, as a member of the curriculum committee, it might help us look at faculty and administration across the elementary schools, as some of them are shared. So it would help a lot of things in my mindset at this point, without thinking about it more strategically.
Noted. All right, so I think we have that's some positive. I'm just trying to pull up the document again. So I think we have some positive some action items that we can move on. So we're looking to, have the presentation by the SRMS leadership team. We're planning on, Dr. De Silva, we're planning on having that at the next committee meeting.
Yeah, I haven't checked with him yet, but as soon as I do that,
we can let him know. And then at the board meeting in June, have the discussion about the opt-in and the opt-out.
yes, I don't know if we have a budget and finance committee meeting prior to the board meeting. I feel like that's probably a no. If there is one, maybe we can come here. If we can be ready for June, then we'll come here if it's before the board meeting. But if not, then we'll just go directly to the board, I guess.
I think that makes sense.
Susie, can I ask one thing, that when we have the CERMS presentation, can I just ask, we don't have to have like Principal Ranieri come as well, but it would be helpful to have some of the ERMS data there as well, just from an equity of learning standpoint and to be able to, as comparison data.
Yeah, I can ask to have both of them there because I think that would be helpful, actually.
Yep. Good, great point, Margaret.
And maybe they can historically talk about the last 4 years as the change happened between the two schools. In terms of the reduction at East Ridge and the students being redistricted. I mean, that would probably be, to tell the story. I think the stories are great.
Our living document is changing as we speak.
Yeah, so I won't remember otherwise.
And I just want to say why I think stories are great, because it talks about the human experience, and particularly the children who were able then to go with their cohorts. So I think that's an important piece to include, because it includes the student stories.
Okay. Okay, so I think we have a starting point.
Agreed. right, so I think we have a good start. It's a good place to go. Is there anything else that the committee feels is relevant to this discussion? All right. There being none, I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn. Liz, second. Kathleen, all in favor?